You shouldn't get up on a soapbox in a novel. Samuel Goldwyn said, you want to send a message, don't put it in a movie, go to Western Union, to the extent anybody knows what Western Union is anymore. But I think thrillers, let's say they transcend a basic shoot 'em up, made for TV movie if they deal with a slightly broader topic. And we can't say anything about it, but of course you've read the book and the twist toward the end is, oh my gosh, look, talk about intrusion.
For me, with a background in law enforcement, it helped me in a couple of different ways. I mean, first of all, I write crime fiction. So I already have an idea of what the proper procedure would be. That's both a blessing and a curse because I know what's supposed to happen, but on the other hand, I have to take steps away from that. Otherwise, it would be the most boring book on the planet.
This week, I got to talk with a power duo of an author pairing, Jeffery Deaver and Isabella Maldonado. They both have written multiple series on their own that are just absolutely action-packed crime fiction, and they came together to write a new series, and the first book in this series is called Fatal Intrusion. I could not put this book down. It is like 440 pages, and I read it in a day and a half. I was glued to the pages. But here's what it's about. Carmen Sanchez is a tough Homeland Security agent who plays by the rules. But when her sister is attacked, revealing a connection to a series of murders across Southern California, she realizes a conventional investigation will not be enough to top the ruthless perpetrator. With nowhere else to turn, Sanchez enlists the aid of Professor Jake Heron, a brilliant and quirky private security expert who, unlike Sanchez, believes rules are merely suggestions. The two have a troubled past, but he owes her a favor and she's cashing in. They team up to catch the assailant, who mystifyingly has no discernible motive and fits no classic criminal profile. All they have to go on is a distinctive tattoo and a singular obsession that gives this chillingly efficient tactician his nickname, Spider. Over the next 72 hours, Sanchez and Heron find themselves in the midst of a lethal chess match with the killer as they race to stop the carnage. As the victims mount, so do the risks, because the Spider's web of intrigue is more sinister and goes far deeper than anyone could possibly anticipate. There's so much I want to tell you about this book, and this is one of those where every time I go to review it, I'm like, I want to tell you everything, but you want to be just as surprised as I was by the amount of reveals and twists that they pack into this action-packed thriller. It is so fun. If you love crime procedurals, if you love action thrillers, and if you love the hunt to find a serial killer, you are going to love everything about this book and read it way faster than you think you will. That being said, let's hear from Jeffery and Isabella. But before we dive into the book, I did want to get to know a little bit about your guys' backstory. So I know you guys have both written quite a few books already, but when did you know you wanted to write a book, or that you knew you wanted to be an author?
You want to go first, or?
You mean when did we we were going to write a book together or separately?
Separately. For each of you, what was your moment of I think I could write a book or something like that?
Okay. Well, Jeff, then maybe you should go first because you started writing before I did.
Sure. I was a nerd when I was growing up, and I was a nerd when the word meant something. Like now, you're a nerd, you're a billionaire with a cat app, TikTok video or something. But no, I had no talent for sports or anything. But I was drawn to books, and I love stories. I kind of lost myself in them. So I was reading adult sorts of books. Murder mysteries and thrillers, not young adult fiction, but adult, like James Bond and John D. McDonald and Raymond Chandler at 8 and 9. And I actually somewhat egotistically thought, well, I can do that, and I might be able to come up with a better ending. Again, hubris of youth. So I started writing when I was about 11 or 12. But there are no prodigy writers. There are prodigy artists and musicians. But so I figured I needed to work for a while doing something that was kind of related to writing. So I went to journalism school. I was a reporter for a while. I went to law to report on law, but oddly, I did well in law school, much to the shock of all of my prior teachers. And so I got a job practicing law for a bit. But all the while, I kept writing. And finally, in my 30s, I said, okay, now I can write uh, fiction. I felt comfortable starting to write fiction. And then about, I guess it was 40, 35 so years ago, I was making enough at the writing to quit legal practice. So I've been a full-time novelist and short story writer since then, but it was kind of baked into the system.
Yeah.
And
How about you?
I mean, I fell in love with books and stories also as a kid. And the book that really kind of moved me was A Wrinkle in Time. When I read that book, I was very
Yes.
young, and I just thought it was magic. And the way that the story
Mhm.
just took me to a totally magical place, I thought, I want to be able to do this for people. And
Yeah.
I think that what Jeff said is extremely true in that there are really no prodigy writers, and I everything I tried to write, as a really young like teenager or what, it was terrible, obviously, and so I decided that I just needed more experience, more life experience, because I felt like I wanted to have something to say. And
Mhm.
as a kid, I really didn't have anything to say, I felt like. So then when I thought, I'll just put that aside, and then later in life, after I have more life experience under my belt, then I'll write. Well, I ended up going into law enforcement, and after 22 years with a gun and a badge, I had stuff to say. And so then
Yeah.
that's when I was able to write, and I felt like everything just really clicked. And all the time I was reading, though, reading all the
Mhm.
time. And that sort of gave me,
Mhm.
I guess, enough, information to know kind of what I wanted to write and how to do it.
Yeah. That's really cool because in part of my review for this book, that's what I talked about. Like you can feel the fact that you were in law enforcement, just the way that it is written as well. But it sounds like Jeff, you were a journalist for a while, and Isabella, you were in law enforcement for a
Hmm.
while. So for both of you, then how did like those experiences affect the books that you write now?
Well, in my case, journalism and law helped me in two regards. People say, well, Jeff, you were a lawyer and you write crime books. You must have been a criminal lawyer. And my answer is, well, I represented large multinational banks.
Mm.
So draw your own conclusions from that. Um,
Mm.
but those both help me. First of all, I'm a very pedestrian writer. In other words, I put sentences together, not necessarily all subject, verb, object, but I'm not like a Cormac McCarthy or a David Foster Wallace. I respect style, but I'm not a real stylist. And that came from journalism. Communication is the most important thing. And I tell my students in the courses I teach, break all the rules you want when it comes to grammar, punctuation, syntax, and so forth. But it's about clear communication. If the reader knows what you're saying, fine. And law helped me
Yeah.
with research. I mean, I don't really. I didn't actually. I was joking a second ago. I didn't do any criminal law, but I knew criminal procedures and the
Mhm.
Constitution and Bill of Rights and things like that. So that was helpful to me, and so those still are helpful to this day.
Mhm.
And for me, with a background in law enforcement, it helped me in a couple of different ways. I mean, first of all, I write crime fiction. So
Yes.
I already have an idea of what the proper procedure would be. Now, that's both a blessing and a curse, because I know what's supposed to happen, but on the other hand, I have to take steps away from that. Otherwise, it would be the most
Mhm.
boring book on the planet. Um, every time a cop discharges a weapon, they're immediately taken offline, and there's a big investigation and all kinds of these things.
Mhm.
It would slow down the pace of your thriller to have your cop taken
Yeah.
offline for 30 days because they discharged their weapon or something. That's just one example. There's a lot
Mhm.
of other things that go into it. The other thing is very much like Jeff, and one of the reasons that we write together so well and he was saying he got it from journalism, I got it from police work, is a very direct, plain spoken style. um, you know
Mm-hmm.
I can say both of us have a large vocabulary, but we don't deploy it in all of our writing. It's a very direct, very plain style, and it's short and to the point. And that is because if you're doing your job right, your police report should not be creative writing. It's supposed to be
Yeah.
just the facts, ma'am. So that is kind of how we both approach it.
Yeah. It makes sense too, just kind of like with the pacing that we were talking about before we
Yep.
were recording, is like to keep the pacing moving, kind of like you're saying, you're not going to follow every police procedural or police procedure,
Mhm.
or we would be like
Yeah.
learning about
Yep.
paperwork instead of like catching the killer. And I think why I just was so, I could not put this book down. Like I was reading while I was cooking, I was reading while I was drying my hair, like just like doing everything I could to get through it. But when the description and the language isn't super flowery, we can just like get through the actual story. So I feel like that works really to your benefit in this
The
genre for
American
sure.
writer Nathaniel Hawthorne said that a writer's words should dissolve into pure thought, so that the
Mm,
reader doesn't look at the prose and say, wow, that's beautiful, it's scintillating. I have no idea what it means. The idea is to get
yeah,
what's in the writer's head into the reader's head with as little static and interference as possible.
I love that. That's
Mhm.
definitely how I prefer to read,
Mhm.
for sure. So how did you guys decide to work together on a series? What's the backstory there?
Oh, do you want to tell her about Baby Mafia?
Sure. We first met in 2017, I think it was, at a conference in Chicago called Murder and Mayhem in Chicago. And it's a
Nice.
crime writers and readers conference. And we were there over St. Patrick's Day, which was fun for me because I had no idea that they dyed the river green. It was
Mm,
incredible to see. But anyway, so we're there at the conference and we're talking. There's like a green room for the writers who are giving presentations, and I was in the green room, and Jeff was there, and Gillian Flynn was there. And so the three of us
oh wow.
started talking, and we just started riffing on what would be like a really wild story that that you could write that no one would expect. And it would be like, well, what if there was a crime boss, and the crime boss was a baby? And this was actually before that ever like became a Disney thing or whatever. But we were talking
Uh-huh.
about this, and we were chatting and making jokes, and we enjoyed each other's sense of humor, and the three of us just kept
Mm,
laughing and laughing. And also at some point, Jeff mentioned that something about being in living in Reston, and that is where I was raised, and that's where I'm from.
mm,
And it was like, wow, we had that in common too. And so that was the beginning of talking about how we, just first we had to just like each other and get along
yeah.
together. And then later we met again in 2019 at the Thriller Fest conference in New York City. And at that point, I actually approached him about blurbing a book, which is, I guess I'm
Mm,
lucky I didn't realize I had to get through the first few pages.
It,
But
it,
he
it,
did.
it hit you hit the ground running. Don't worry, no
I,
problem.
I always do. I always do tend to write like my stories start fast. But yeah, so he read the
yes.
cipher and he blurbed it, and that just took off and became a bestseller and everything, and it really worked. But Jeff got a chance to see my writing and then see that I write very similarly to the way he does. And there was even some readers that said, "Oh, this reminds me of Jeffery Deaver," and that sort of thing. And then
Yep.
after that, we just sort of stayed in touch, and then eventually it was like, you know what, we should try doing this. And at first Jeff was
Hmm.
hesitant because he actually says he doesn't play well with others. I've never written a book with anyone before. He's never written a book with anyone before. It was a
Hmm.
complete leap of faith, but it worked out incredibly well.
We were very lucky
Yes, it did.
because um, we write third person, past tense, multiple points of view, short paced, fast paced, Um, Generally short chapters. The books are not too long, maybe 100,000 words in the crime genre and the thriller genre. And the thriller genre is what we describe as asking the question, what is going to happen, as opposed to a murder mystery like Dorothy L. Sayers or Agatha Christie, which asks the question, what happened in the past? And that's valid. I mean, I learned my twists, and I love my twists. I learned those from Agatha Christie, among others. But that story is slower. It tends to be more character driven, and that's not what
Hmm.
either of us do. So we meshed on all those levels. I could not write Barbara Vine, the alter ego of Ruth Rendell. Barbara Vine wrote very dense psychological thrillers that were brilliant, but not a lot happened in them. I mean, it was all very
Hmm.
internal, brilliant works, but that wouldn't work. I mean, we just had this groundwork together, and it moved on from there.
Yeah. How did you guys? So you would definitely have really similar styles. It wasn't. I didn't feel like when I was reading one chapter, I was like, "Oh, this is a different
Hmm.
person writing." But I imagine you kind of divided it up in some way. So how was your writing process as you started to write the book together?
Well, you want to run through the rough part?
Sure. Sure. So, excuse me. So when we were pitching the book, we had to put a proposal together, and we both worked really hard on that. But we kind of knew what the story was generally going to be, because we had to, we wrote like a synopsis in the first four chapters, so we knew what the story was going to be. And then when it came time to writing it, we both do some outlining. However, I always say Jeff is a world class outliner. I mean, he's very, very detailed. He will write a 40-page outline. I will write like a maybe 10-page outline, something like that. It's much more terse. Anyway, so we get the outline done first, and then we start picking chapters, and it's like, oh, I'll write this, I'll write this, I'll write this in the initial phase. So we each do write individual chapters, but, and I think this is why you didn't notice a lot of difference with the chapters, is after that, when we get into the editing phase, we are both reworking and editing each
Mm.
other's work and going through it very, very thoroughly. And we are free to change things. And this is something that we always say, there's a no ego zone. We declare a
Hmm.
no ego zone. So that means you have to be willing to have the other person edit your work and, change things. And it is, I think, absolutely essential. And I was
Hmm.
really happy about that. I have always been very comfortable being edited, but again, it's the first time either one of us ever worked together. And I always,
Hmm.
I say this, Jeff could be a diva, but he's not. He didn't mind at all. As a matter of fact, he encouraged it. He's like, go through and, make whatever changes. And I said the same thing, go through and make whatever changes. And we both really made it our joint work by the time it was finished.
There were, the question would arise occasionally. Um, I don't really have a handle on this scene. Why don't you take that?
Hmm.
And then it would come back to me, and I'd say, okay, that's fine. And I maybe or maybe didn't edit very much of it at all. But, it was, we just felt more comfortable at times about certain things. Isabella took more of the actual procedure because, yeah, there's that pesky little Fourth Amendment. Damn it, you got to read people their rights and all that sort of stuff. I would be happy just shooting them, immediate justice, but you can't really do that. And then,
Yeah.
but a lot of the police procedure, and and I know a bit after having written a number of books like this. I know weapons, I know procedure to some extent, but I also, because the book, as you know, has some cyber issues in it,
Hmm.
and I've written
Hmm.
about four or five um, internet oriented thrillers. So I was kind of comfortable writing that sort of stuff. And then we both did research, a great deal of research, and
Hmm.
there were times when people who've read the book already. It's not out yet as we're having this conversation, but they'd say,
Hmm.
"Wow, that was a great thing you wrote, Jeff." And I said, "No, I didn't write that. Isabella wrote that." I even said that about a passage that I thought she had written. It turned out I had written it. But then we also so we had the outline, and then we worked very quickly, very intensely, and then we also did rewrite after rewrite after
Yeah.
rewrite, and we worked with a stellar team at Thomas and Mercer, and again, I've done a lot of writing over the years. But there's never a single book of short story that cannot benefit from being edited. And
Hmm.
if your ego gets in the way, well, you produce a less than perfect product for the readers, and that's a sin. Readers make that's what this is all about. They are our gods,
Hmm.
and if you produce a less than perfect story for them, well, that's a crime.
Yeah. That's really cool that you could just remove the ego and kind of like give each other feedback even, and then yeah, then you kind of got to go through the editing process together as well. Um, what was like your initial inspiration for like the spoiler free basis of the story? So like, how did you guys come up with kind of like what was going on in the story?
Mhm.
Well, that was a little bit Isabella's primarily. I mean,
Mhm.
uh, I can't actually remember what the specific genesis was, but you had a
Mhm.
kind of a rough idea, and then we both sat down and did worked on the outline. That went back and forth, and it morphed and changed. And the it's known. This book, Fatal Intrusion, is known as all of our books for the twists and surprises and twists and surprises. And after that, there are more twists and surprises because that's just exhilarating. And we'd
Yes.
get into the outline, and then we'd say, "Oh, you know what? Let's try this here."
Yeah.
And then okay, let's try that there. I tend to put in too many twists, and I think you had pointed out, Isabella, that that was maybe a twist too far,
Mhm.
and so we pulled back from that. But the general process was that we took the core idea and then ran with it, and it's the writing process. Ideas emerge, and even in the writing process, some ideas emerge. I mean, this outline probably started being 60 pages, 60, 70 pages, and
Hmm.
then we that was the first draft of the book. But then, yeah, okay, well, that ended up being 80,000 words. Well, we need a little bit more. Oh, here's a good twist. Oh, that's too much. Take it out. So it's a very organic process.
That's cool that you could write because it's so complex, everything that
Mhm.
happens. But that's cool that you can still kind of you can still be figuring it out
Mhm.
organically as you write it, even though there's that much going on.
Sure.
Mhm.
So I loved the dynamic between the two main
Mhm.
characters, and it really made me realize how much I love the like badass female character with like a nerdy, not as like action equipped male. Like I was just really enjoying it.
Mhm.
So how did you guys approach like creating those characters, and did like either of you like spearhead one, or was it still kind of collaborative?
Well, it was in the beginning, we were trying to think, we wanted to do, well, I always seem to write these Latina law enforcement types. I mean, I've written a few of them
Yes.
now. And so we thought that's good. We should do that. But we wanted to do something that was fresh and that hasn't been done to death. And so we were looking around and thinking, what is there, going on or whatever. And we hit upon sort of through a process of elimination, we hit upon HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, which is part of Homeland Security. And we're like, wow, that hasn't been done to death. I mean, I had to do some research, to even learn about them myself. And so it's like, okay, that's cool because she would have jurisdiction really anywhere and even overseas, really anywhere in the world. She could get involved with stuff. So it's like, okay, that gives some fun. And then Jeff knows California a lot better than I do, so it's like, well, let's base her, in California. So
Mhm.
he was really contributing a lot of that. But then we're like, she needs a foil. Everybody needs someone to to work against or with or what have you. And that was
Yeah.
really, more of Jeff coming up with the idea of Professor Heron. What a fun
Mhm.
character. And it's like it was sort of through the process of accretion. Jeff was creating more about him. But the cool thing is that once he really solidified, I was able to write chapters in his POV as well as Jeff could,
Nice.
because this idea that really started with Jeff just became a whole person. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good,
That's really cool.
the foil is a good word. They complement each other. And she is a badass, but a strict law enforcer. She takes the oath, of course. And
Mhm.
Jake is, he's what's self-described intrusionist. That's his job. And he lectures. It's like Cal, it's like University of California, Berkeley, although it's a private college there, and he lectures in public, does TED talks, although we don't mention TED, but that kind of thing about the dangers of intrusion from corporate overreach, government overreach, and even personal overreach, like domestic abuse, is a form of intrusion. And so he's basically saying, okay, you people have to be careful. You have to stand up for
Mhm.
yourselves and be very aware of the dangers of somebody crossing the boundary. And he analyzes all of life and history in terms of intrusion. And so he is a nerd, definitely a nerd. He knows which end of the gun the bullets come out of, but that's about it. And
Yeah.
so but he feels very strongly about this. But by definition, he doesn't really give you know what about the rules. And it's like, well, I'll do
Yeah.
anything I can to protect people. And
Yes.
Carmen, of course, is like, whoa, wait a minute. No, if you don't color within the lines to some extent, the bad guys can get away in court.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
um, okay, we won't talk current events, but it just does happen occasionally that people can get away with things, and we feel
Yes.
that let's make sure the case is buttoned up entirely. So that's Carmen's job. She makes sure that happens.
I hope you're enjoying this episode of Bookwild, and if you are, could I ask you a favor? Could you go and rate and review this podcast on whatever platform you're listening? Ratings and reviews make the biggest difference in discoverability of the podcast, and I definitely want to find all of our fellow thriller readers out there. So if you could go rate the podcast and leave a short review, that would make a huge difference. Thank you, and let's get back to the show. I thought Jake's Professor Heron, his whole world of being really fascinated with intrusions
Hmm.
was so fascinating, and kind of like you were saying, you guys didn't want to do something that had been beat to death, and this was like very new
Hmm.
to me
Hmm.
to hear someone who was kind of focused on like the way that you can invade on any level, like you were saying, like it even happens at a personal level, it's happening in the internet, like all kinds of levels. So what made you guys want to focus a, a really an action thriller around, because it really does I'm struggling to say what I'm trying to say, but it really pervades the whole plot, this idea of intrusions and like being invaded. So like how did you decide on that?
Well, I think
Or did you create the character and then that kind of just did it?
yeah, I mean, I think um, you shouldn't get up on a soapbox in a novel. These are entertainments. Samuel Goldwyn said, if you want to send a message, don't put it in a movie. Go to Western Union, to the extent anybody knows what Western Union is anymore. But I think thrillers um, can let's say they transcend a basic shoot 'em up made for TV movie if they deal with a slightly broader topic. And we can't say anything about it, but of course you've read the book and the twist toward the
Mm-hmm.
end is, oh my gosh, look, talk about intrusion. And that seemed to be a
Yes.
pretty good thing that would get people's eyebrows raised. Of course, I always think that when you write a book, you should do something like that to get a hook for publicity. But we can't talk about it because it's a big surprise. So in theory, it's a
Yeah.
good hook for publicity, but we can't really talk about it. But there is a hook there,
Yeah.
everybody. So,
Yeah. Yeah. The way it plays out is really cool. One of the other, I almost would say themes, but I don't know that it's a theme, is that we spend time in the killer's mind and he is obsessed with spiders. And I am terrified of
Yep.
them. And so every time I was reading about it, I was like, this is so uncomfortable, but I have to keep reading. And the metaphor kind of extends throughout where like he's kind of wanting to approach his kills the way spiders do. So when did that idea kind of come in to include that as a part of
I'll
him?
blame my co-writer for that. So she may
Yeah.
want to address that.
That is good. I mean, that was actually baked in from the very beginning. The very original
Nice.
kernel of an idea involved a spider, and we ended up, changing sort of how it was going to play out, but that was always there. And
Mm,
like you, I find spiders horrible and awful, and I almost arachnophobic. But it's like, okay,
yeah.
then this is something that um, it's a good way to write about someone who sort of embodies those things, and it's not just the creep factor, but actually when you start researching spiders, and Jeff is the king of research, and he probably knows more about spiders than a lot of people right now, but it turns out they are kind of fascinating in a horrible way. They are very different, the different species, and we do go into it in the book, and this is how he's doing it,
Mm-hmm.
and this, that, and the other thing, and it really is kind of a fascinating way to do it. But yeah, it was always baked in.
Yeah. That's cool. And it made it like really unique and like memorable in a different
Mm-hmm.
way. So, and there were times when I was like, I'm about to fall asleep. I need to stop reading this because I'm notorious for having dreams with like big spiders coming through the window and
Oh, thank you
stuff.
so much for that. I really appreciate that. Yes.
Yeah. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a cool approach and like kind of added to the like chapters when we were in his mind to kind of like understand him a little bit more. But another question I had, so something kind of randomly cool that's a through line through this podcast was I had someone on who had been at Thriller Fest, and I asked her what her favorite panel was, and she brought up the like how to write action scenes. And I
Oh
know
yeah.
you were actually on
Yeah.
the panel, Isabella, and I
Yeah.
thought it was cool. They had someone like actually acting it
Yep.
out, and Greg, who was acting it out, has been on the podcast now as well. So we've kind of got this little action panel thing going on. But how do you guys approach writing action scenes? Because I hear different things from different people.
Well, I hate it because the rule is you've got to make the book different. It's got to be a reader. I just hate it when a reader says, "Oh, been there, seen that."
Yeah.
You've got to do something different. And that scene, and I'm sure we're kind of a PG rated podcast, so I'll simply say adult relations. Those scenes are very
Oh,
hard
you're
to
good.
write, and action scenes are very hard to write. Why? Because for 2,000 years, people have been writing those scenes, and it's hard to take
Yeah.
get a different take on it. So, but you know what? We get paid to tell a story. So you roll up your sleeves and you do it. So it's the least favorite part of mine, but it gets done.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't actually. That's a good question. I don't know that we've ever been asked that, Isabel.
Yeah. Well, for me,
Yeah.
I borrow from stuff I've actually been
Mm.
involved with. Again, because I'm usually writing
Right.
some kind of a law enforcement female. I just like what I do is I sort of go back in my memory banks and take things that I've been involved in, action situations, but I have to really blow them up way out of proportion of what really happened to me because, yeah, I wasn't involved in a bunch of shootouts and all this, I no. So it's a matter
Yeah.
of using your imagination to augment it. But what I also do, and I feel like this is something that I bring to the table that is different. A lot of people, it seems like these days, are writing female law enforcement types, but there aren't that many
Hmm.
female law enforcement types who are writing. So it's like, okay, I need to do this authentically. So what I think is different that I do is I try to make my stuff more realistic in the sense of
Hmm.
I don't take, and I blame TV for a lot of this and movies and stuff like that, where you see a size zero actress or actor, you're supposed to say now, and she takes a 250-pound, muscular man and throws him casually over her shoulder. It's so ridiculous. And
Hmm.
my own experience in fighting with and arresting a man, it is really
Hmm.
hard to do. um, and you can't have a fair fight and just like duke it out. Well, I shouldn't say you can't. There are very rare women who can do it, and they have had a lot of training, and
Hmm.
usually things like martial arts or something will figure in. But your average woman is not going to be able to do it that way. So I have my women use their brains and leverage the parts of their
Hmm.
body, like their core and their quadriceps, and those parts of the hip flexors, those parts of the female anatomy that are more powerful. So I do
Hmm.
that, and then I have them use sort of clever ingenuity around, or they have to use their weapons, which is what I had to rely on too, because
Hmm.
otherwise it just is not, I think, going to be accurate, and it feels wrong, and I don't like it when I see that.
Yeah. I do like that concept and that approach, that it's like even like recognizing that they have to be a little bit smarter in what they're doing, or they have to think a little more
Hmm.
because they're at a disadvantage in that
Yep.
situation. That makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. The one of the other things that the book focuses on, especially kind of with intrusion and invasion, is like the internet and AI as well, but also like some of the really hateful dark
Yes.
corners of the internet
Yep.
as well, and how dangerous that can be. So, did you guys do some research on that? I know you've kind of written books that encompass some of it, Jeffrey, but how did you guys approach including those parts?
Well, yeah, the it's not really giving anything away to say that there's a group of who we uh, call with some disdainful affection, if that's even a term, but the haters. And of
Yeah.
course, in the language of the internet, that is the letter H and the number 8 ERS, and that's kind of a group of young, disaffected. I won't use it because we're a good podcast, but little creeps, we could say. And they
Yes.
live in
Yes.
basements, and they don't really do much. They can't get a job. Well, they could, but they don't, and they complain about not getting a job. And they just want to go online and play video games, and then go to
Yes.
the it's not even necessarily the dark web. It's just these chat boards,
Yeah.
and they diss people and hate people, and there's a certain level of anonymity. You can get a
Hmm.
proxy, or you can don't necessarily even need a proxy. You can just sign on anonymously, and just spew these vile hatred things. So it doesn't take much, technical research to go online and find this kind of garbage. And so we thought that too was an important thing to talk about. The ideally of our millions and millions, thinking optimistically, readers around the world, uh, very, very few of them will have run into a serial killer or a group of terrorists, but everybody has got a child, friends with children, or maybe parents or cousins or relatives who are, who are going through a difficult time. And this, what I call the soap opera element of a novel, I think is very important. So we try to be very, very accurate about, and also accurate, but also to, use those emotions as well as the exciting car chase and shoot 'em up scene, so that the readers say, "Oh, yeah, I know that," and my heart kind of goes out to this person, or I revile that person, and that's what makes I think a more engaging emotional experience of the book.
I agree. Yeah, you definitely. There were multiple times where this book was reminding me, like, oh, we really live our lives really publicly. And some people could really take that and do bad things with it, basically, is kind of what that follows. So it does. It was making me reflect on even my own life as
Well, and
well.
let me ask my co-author a question, which I don't think I've ever asked before. Did you do like youth investigations when you were with the police department?
No, I never did. But obviously, you would run across some of these cases, but I never specialized. But certainly, I had cases that I investigated that involved youth and juveniles and arrested them and stuff. It was just never my focus. And it is a very
Mhm.
difficult and vulnerable time in someone's life and impressionable. And it is really unfortunate. And I think it's one of the things that we decided that we wanted to kind of talk about a little bit was, you know, the trolling that goes on. And
Yeah.
that's really what, some
Mhm.
of we wanted to describe from a different perspective, some of these trolls and, and kind of what they do. And it's a tangential thing, but then it sort of does become involved in the whole plot. I'm sure people who are
Yeah.
listening right now are probably like, what? Wait a minute. We have spiders. We have trolls. We have, there's a killer running around. She's with Homeland Security.
Yes.
What on earth? I know it sounds wild, right? Well, it is
Hmm.
wild, and you have to read it to
It is.
understand, right? I mean, you've read it. There's a lot going on,
Yes.
but the weird thing is, I mean, it all comes together really, really well, and we're
Yes.
actually busily right now writing the sequel. So yes, we
Nice.
are. That
Nice.
I think this is the first time we're talking about it. We're writing the
Yeah, that's
sequel
right.
as
We
we
haven't
speak.
announced it before. You were
Yeah.
there first, Kate.
Yep.
I know that was gonna be it was gonna be my final question actually was well first I wanted to say to what you were saying that there's so much going on. When I first started reading it, my two friends who I talk a lot to about what I'm reading, I was like texting them and I was like, there's a serial killer on the loose. There's a professor who in my mind I've made this really hot professor who is really concerned with privacy. This woman's having to work with someone she swore she would never work with again. And I was like, and there's hackers. I was like, and I'm at 15% right now. And I was like, this book has just like grabbed my attention, and I'm sure they're just going to keep adding more
Yeah.
things the whole time. So
Mhm.
I loved that. I was so hooked that there was that much happening
Mhm.
that quickly. So I loved how everything came together. But I did want to know, when you guys started writing it, were you intending it to be a series? Was that how you even approached
Mhm.
it?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean,
Nice.
when I started reading, I mentioned reading James Bond when I was 8 or 9. And by the way, that sounds a little strange, but you have to remember that Ian Fleming was writing in the 1950s and 60s, and it was a much tamer time then. I mean, he has a reputation for being a ladies' man, and that was true to some extent, but everything happened off camera, and there were very
Hmm.
few deaths. And actually, when James Bond, who was a hired assassin, he didn't have the right. Double O didn't mean he had the right to protect himself. He was hired to go kill
Hmm.
somebody. He would go into a depression for 4 or 5 months after that because he had taken a life. So the books were
Huh.
somewhat discerning, and the movies are quite different. I'm not a huge fan of the movies, but the original books
Hmm.
were quite something. So reading those stories, oh, I could not wait until my character would come back again. Characters, I just
Yeah.
love the characters, and Travis McGee on the Busted Flush, his
Hmm.
houseboat down in Florida, and Sam Spade in San Francisco, and well, Sherlock Holmes, of course, and Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot. I just love those characters. So we thought we'd give it a shot, and so yes, Jake and Carmen will be back. We do have to finish the book. There's that, but
There's
it
that
will
part.
happen. Don't worry.
Yeah, I trust that you guys can write another really great one. I can't wait for them to be back. I'm very
Mhm.
excited to read the next one for sure. I loved their dynamic so much.
Yeah.
It just worked.
Yeah.
I feel like I had another question from what you were just saying, but it might have left my mind. Yeah, that might be it. So where can people follow you to stay up to date with everything so that they can get hooked on this series too?
Well, there's a landing page for the book, Fatal Intrusion, on Amazon. If you look it up, there's a landing page for the book that will, give you all the information about that, where to get it, and also you can pre-order the next one. You can pre-order this one right now, and then you can soon there'll be a link up to pre-order the next one. We're just getting that finalized, so that's one good place to look. You can also find it right now. I think at the moment it's on sale for pre-order at Barnes and Noble, but depending on when this airs. But you can also get it at Barnes and Noble. You can get it at a lot of independent bookstores. And then what Jeff and I would really love is we're having like a mini book tour, and we would love to see everyone to come out. And it's going to be a lot of fun when we go to our live events. We're just having it's a small book tour, but we're going to have a great time doing it. And of course, either one of our websites, we actually link to each other's websites too. So you can look up either one of us and you can get everything you need there as well.
Indeed.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I will put all those links in the show notes so that everyone can keep up with everything. And thank you so much for talking with me about it.
Okay. Thank you so much. A real pleasure.